The vineyard stretched endlessly under the Napa Valley sun, its emerald rose disappearing into rolling hills that seemed painted by God himself. Crystal chandeliers hung from ancient oak trees, casting rainbow fragments across white linens, and gold-rimmed china. Everything about Rebecca's wedding screamed perfection, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the string quartet playing softly near the rose garden. Graham Wilder adjusted his Armani cufflinks and surveyed the rehearsal dinner with the detached appreciation of someone who'd attended too many elite gatherings. At 35, he'd learned to navigate these events with practiced charm, his tech empire having bought him entry into circles where old money met new success. But tonight felt different. Tonight, he was here for Marcus, the only person who'd ever seen through his carefully constructed facade. Graham. Rebecca glided over in her rehearsal dress, a vision in ivory silk that probably cost more than most people's cars. "I'm so glad you could make it. Marcus has been talking about his best man speech for weeks." He smiled, the expression as automatic as breathing. "Wouldn't miss it. Everything looks incredible." "Rebecca, it should we've been planning for 18 months. Her laugh tinkled like the crystal glasses surrounding them. "Though I have to warn you, we had a last-minute addition to the bridal party. My old college friend Mara is filling in for Stephanie, who came down with mono. She's well, you'll see." Before Graham could ask what that cryptic comment meant, a commotion near the estate's main entrance drew everyone's attention. A taxi had pulled up to the circular drive, and from it emerged a woman who looked like she'd been assembled in a hurry. Her burgundy bridesmaid dress clearly borrowed or bought off the rack hung slightly wrong on her frame, and her dark hair had escaped whatever style she'd attempted. Wisping around her face in the evening breeze, Mara Lynn stood at the edge of perfection, clutching a small overnight bag and looking like she might bolt at any moment. Graham watched as conversations quieted and heads turned. The whispers started immediately. "That's her," someone murmured. "The one who, I heard she was in rehab." "No, it was the thing with James in college. Rebecca never got over it." Why would Rebecca invite her if guilt? Probably, you know, how Rebecca is about appearances. Graham found himself studying Mara as she approached the gathering. She moved with an odd combination of determination and reluctance, like someone walking toward their own execution. When she reached Rebecca, the bride's embrace was perfectly choreographed for the watching crowd, warm enough to seem genuine, brief enough to maintain distance. "Mara, you made it." Rebecca's voice carried just far enough for the nearest guests to hear. "Everyone. This is Mara Lynn, one of my dearest friends from college." The introduction felt rehearsed, polite, and utterly hollow. Mara's smile was smaller, more genuine, tinged with something that might have been sadness or resignation. When their eyes met across the crowd, Graham felt an unexpected jolt of recognition, not of her face, but of the expression she wore. He'd seen it in his own mirror often enough, the look of someone who'd learned to expect disappointment. "I'm sorry I'm late," Mara said, her voice carrying a slight rasp that suggested she'd been crying or hadn't slept. "The flight was delayed, and then the taxi couldn't find the address." "No worries at all." Rebecca's laugh was a little too bright. "Graham, this is Mara." "Mara." "Graham Wilder, Marcus's best man. He's the tech genius I was telling you about." When Mara's hand met his, Graham noticed the slight tremor in her fingers and the way she looked just past his left shoulder. Instead of meeting his eyes directly, her handshake was firm though, deliberate, like she was proving something to herself. "Nice to meet you," she said simply. "Likewise." He found himself holding her hand a moment longer than necessary, struck by the absence of calculation in her manner. Most people who met him had an agenda, a startup idea, an investment opportunity, a connection they wanted to make. Mara seemed to want nothing from him except to get through this introduction and disappear into the crowd. As if summoned by his thoughts, Marcus appeared beside them, pulling Graham into one of his characteristic bear hugs. "There he is, the man who's going to make me look good tomorrow." "That's a tall order," Graham replied, falling easily into their familiar banter. "I can only work with the material I'm given." Marcus laughed and turned to Mara, his expression shifting to something gentler, more careful. "Mara, I'm really glad you came." Her smile became real for the first time since she'd arrived. "I wouldn't have missed it, Marcus. Congratulations. There was history there. Graham realized something deeper than casual acquaintance. Marcus had a way of collecting strays, broken people who needed someone to believe in them. Graham had been one himself 15 years ago, when a coding error had nearly destroyed his first company, and Marcus had talked him down from the edge of his apartment building's roof. As the evening progressed, Graham found himself aware of Mara in ways that surprised him. She positioned herself at the periphery of conversations, present but not participating, like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. When Rebecca gave a toast about perfect love and perfect timing, Mara's knuckles went white around her wine glass. When the bride's mother made a comment about some people needing to learn when to let go of the past, Mara excused herself to the restroom and didn't return for 20 minutes. Graham began to understand that whatever had happened between Mara and Rebecca went deeper than college drama. This wasn't about a boy or a betrayal. This was about someone who'd been erased from a story and was now being forced to watch the edited version play out in front of 200 guests. As the rehearsal dinner wound down and people began drifting back to their rooms at the resort, Graham found himself lingering. He told himself he was just being polite, helping Marcus ensure everyone had transportation back to their accommodations. But when he saw Mara standing alone by the fountain, looking lost and slightly overwhelmed, he knew he'd been lying to himself. "Need a ride back to the hotel?" he asked, approaching carefully, the way one might approach a wounded animal. She looked up, startled. "Oh, I'm actually staying in the main house. Rebecca said there was a room available." Of course she was, kept close, but not too close, given a place at the table, but reminded of her position at the bottom of the hierarchy. "The main house is beautiful," he said. "I'm in the guest cottage, but I spent some time in the library earlier. Incredible collection." Something flickered in her eyes, interest, maybe, or surprise. "You like books?" "Guilty pleasure." Marcus used to joke that I was the only tech CEO who'd rather read than network. For the first time all evening, Mara's smile looked unguarded. "What's your favorite?" It was such a simple question, but the way she asked it like the answer actually mattered to her caught him off guard. Most people asked about his company, his investments, his exit strategy. No one asked about his favorite book. "Changes depending on my mood," he said honestly. "But I keep coming back to The Great Gatsby. Something about the idea of reinventing yourself, I guess." Her expression shifted, became more complex, and then discovering that the past has a way of catching up with you anyway. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the fountain's gentle splash the only sound between them. Graham realized he didn't want this conversation to end. Didn't want to return to his empty cottage and spend another night scrolling through emails and avoiding sleep. "Well," Mara said finally, breaking the spell, "I should probably get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be intense." As she walked away, her wrinkled dress catching the moonlight, Graham found himself wondering what story she'd tell if given the chance. And for the first time in years, he wanted to know someone's truth, more than their business plan. Graham woke to the sound of voices drifting through his cottage window. The wedding preparations had begun at dawn, and the estate buzzed with the controlled chaos of an event that had been planned, down to the minute. He'd managed maybe 4 hours of sleep. His mind kept turning over his brief conversation with Mara by the fountain. After a quick shower and coffee, he made his way to the main house to check on Marcus. The groom was in the library, pacing in his boxer shorts while his groomsmen tried to convince him to eat something. "There he is," Marcus said, relief evident in his voice. "Please tell me you have Xanax or whiskey or something that'll stop my hands from shaking." "Both, actually," Graham replied, pulling a small flask from his jacket pocket. "But you're not going to need either. You love Rebecca, she loves you, and in about 6 hours, you'll be married to your best friend. My best friend is standing right here in an expensive suit, reminding me why I asked him to be my best man," Marcus said, accepting the flask gratefully. Rebecca is everything I thought I wanted." Graham caught the odd phrasing, but didn't comment. Pre-wedding jitters made everyone philosophical. Instead, he helped wrangle the other groomsmen into their tuxedos and manage the small crises that inevitably Lie rose a missing cufflink, a stained shirt, someone's girlfriend calling to break up with him via text. By noon, the estate had transformed into something from a fairy tale. The ceremony space overlooked the valley, with white chairs arranged in perfect rows and an altar draped in climbing roses. Guests began arriving in designer outfits and expensive cars, the parking area looking like a luxury auto show. Graham was adjusting Marcus's boutonniere when he saw her. Mara stood with the other bridesmaids on the estate's wraparound porch, but she might as well have been on a different planet. While Rebecca's other friends preened in matching rose gold dresses that had clearly been custom fitted, Mara's dress hung differently, not wrong, exactly, but like it belonged to someone else. Her hair had been styled to match the others, but wisps had already escaped, softening the severe updo in a way that was somehow more beautiful than the rigid perfection surrounding her. She was listening to one of the bridesmaids, Courtney. Graham thought her name was, with a polite expression that didn't quite hide her discomfort. "I just think it's so brave of you to come," Courtney was saying, her voice carrying clearly across the porch. "I mean, after everything that happened with James, and then your situation last year, it takes real courage to face people." Mara's spine straightened almost imperceptibly. "I'm here for Rebecca and Marcus," she said quietly. "That's all, of course, and I'm sure Rebecca appreciates it, even if it must be awkward. I mean, we all remember how close you two used to be before." Courtney let the sentence hang, her smile razor-sharp. Graham found himself moving before he'd consciously decided to intervene. He climbed the porch steps with the easy confidence that came from years of navigating corporate politics and social warfare. "Ladies," he said, offering his most charming smile, "I hope I'm not interrupting, but I wanted to thank you all for helping make this day perfect for Marcus. He's been talking about how much it means to him to have Rebecca's closest friends here." The effect was immediate. Courtney's attention shifted to him like a sunflower turning toward light, and the other bridesmaids straightened, recognizing his name if not his face. In the brief chaos of introductions and flirtation, Mara slipped away. Graham found her 20 minutes later in the estate's kitchen garden, sitting on a stone bench between rows of lavender and rosemary. She'd kicked off her heels and was holding them in her lap, looking more relaxed than he'd seen her since she'd arrived. "Escaping the pre-wedding chaos?" he asked. She looked up, startled again, then smiled ruefully. "Is it that obvious? I'm not very good at this whole bridesmaid thing. Mind if I join you? I'm not very good at the best man thing either." She gestured to the space beside her on the bench. Up close, he could see the exhaustion around her eyes, the way she held herself like someone expecting the next blow. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for what you did back there with Courtney. I didn't do anything special. You gave me an exit. In my experience, most people prefer to watch the car crash." She paused, studying his face. "Why did you do it?" It was such a direct question that it caught him off guard. In his world, motivations were layered, transactions were complex, and everyone wanted something. But sitting in this garden with lavender, scenting the air, and Mara's genuine curiosity focused on him, complicated felt like the wrong answer. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be the person everyone's talking about," he said finally. "Different circumstances, but same feeling. Graham Wilder, tech wonderkind, knows what it's like to be gossiped about." There was no mockery in her voice, just gentle surprise. "Graham Wilder, college dropout who nearly jumped off a building when his first company imploded," he corrected. "Marcus pulled me back from that ledge, literally and figuratively. Took me years to stop feeling like everyone was waiting for me to fail again." Mara studied him with new attention. "I didn't know that. Most people don't. Success has a way of rewriting history." He paused, watching a butterfly land on the lavender nearby. "What about you? What's the real story behind all the whispers?" For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep and tired. "Rebecca and I were roommates freshman year. Best friends, or so I thought. She was brilliant and ambitious, and had this way of making you feel like you were part of something important just by being near her." Mara's voice took on the cadence of someone telling a story they'd never told aloud. "Junior year, she started dating James Morrison, you know. The Morrison family, as in Morrison Hotels. I was happy for her. She deserved someone who could match her ambition. Graham waited, recognizing the pause of someone gathering courage. The thing is, James was struggling, really struggling. Depression, anxiety, family pressure. He was falling apart. And Rebecca was so focused on her internship applications and maintaining their image as the perfect power couple that she didn't see it. Or maybe she saw it and didn't know how to handle it. But you did. I listened. I sat with him when he couldn't sleep. I helped him find a therapist, drove him to appointments when he was too shaky to drive himself. Just friend stuff, you know. Except Rebecca walked in on us one night when he was having a panic attack and I was holding him while he cried. Mara's laugh was bitter. She saw what she expected to see. She thought you were having an affair. She accused me of stealing her boyfriend, of being jealous of her success, of systematically undermining their relationship. James tried to explain, but he was in no condition to fight that battle, and I was tired of fighting for a friendship with someone who thought so little of me. Graham felt something shift in his chest, a recognition that went deeper than empathy. So you let her believe what she wanted to believe. I transferred schools, started over. James got the help he needed, and he and Rebecca broke up 6 months. Later, mutual decision, from what I heard. But the story Rebecca told stuck. I became the cautionary tale about jealous friends who betray you. And now you're here because Marcus called me 3 weeks ago and told me that Stephanie had mono, and Rebecca needed another bridesmaid, and would I please come, because it would mean a lot to him. She looked at Graham directly for the first time. Marcus was James's roommate senior year. He knows what really happened. The pieces clicked into place. Marcus, the eternal peacemaker, trying to right an old wrong. Rebecca, trapped by her own narrative, but too proud to admit she'd been mistaken. And Mara, brave enough or foolish enough to walk back into a story that had never been kind to her. Why did you say yes? Graham asked. Because Marcus asked. Because he's good people, and good people deserve to have their friends at their wedding. And because, she paused, her voice becoming smaller. Because I missed her, Rebecca. I missed my friend. Even though I know she's not really my friend anymore. They sat in silence for a while, the afternoon sun warming the garden around them. Graham found himself thinking about reinvention, about the stories people told themselves and the truths they buried underneath. He'd built an empire on the idea that you could code your way out of any problem. But some problems weren't algorithmic. Some problems were just human. I should get back, Mara said eventually, slipping her feet back into her heels. Rebecca will want photos soon, and I need to practice looking like I belong. For what it's worth, Graham said as she stood to leave. I think you belong wherever you choose to be. She turned back, her expression unreadable. That's a nice thought, but belonging isn't really about what you think of yourself, is it? It's about whether other people have room for you in their story. As she walked back toward the house, Graham realized that for the first time in years, he wanted to be part of someone else's story more than he wanted them to be part of his. The ceremony was flawless, as Graham had known it would be. Rebecca glided down the aisle like she was floating, her dress a masterpiece of silk and crystal that caught every ray of sunlight, filtering through the oak trees. Marcus looked properly, stunned by his bride's beauty, and when they exchanged vows, his voice cracked with genuine emotion. Graham delivered his best man speech without a hitch, hitting all the right notes about friendship, love, and the courage it takes to promise forever to another person. The crowd laughed at his jokes and applauded at the appropriate moments, and if his eyes kept drifting to the bridesmaid standing at the end of the line, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles showed white against her rose-gold dress, well, no. One seemed to notice. Mara had been perfect throughout the ceremony, smiling at the right moments, dabbing at her eyes when Rebecca teared up during her vows, holding her bouquet with practiced grace. But Graham had learned to read the subtle signs of someone barely holding it together, and he could see the strain in the set of her shoulders, the careful control in every gesture. The reception was held in the estate's main courtyard, under strings of lights that turned the evening into something magical. The band was excellent, the food was extraordinary, and the wine flowed freely. Graham made the rounds expected of him, charming Rebecca's family and Marcus's business partners, deflecting investment pitches with practiced ease. He was trapped in a conversation with Rebecca's father about emerging markets when he saw Mara slip away from the bridal party table. She'd been sitting between Courtney and another bridesmaid whose name he hadn't caught, nodding politely while they discussed someone's recent engagement and the merits of destination honeymoons. But when Rebecca stood to give a speech about perfect love and perfect timing, Mara had gone very still, and Graham had watched her excuse herself as the bride continued talking about how wonderful it was to be surrounded by the people who truly matter. He waited 5 minutes, then made his own excuses and followed. He found her in the estate's library, curled in one of the leather armchairs with a book in her lap and tears streaming silently down her face. The room was dark except for a single reading lamp, and the sounds of the celebration were muffled by thick walls and heavy curtains. "Sorry," she said when she noticed him, wiping at her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I needed a minute. I'll be back out soon," instead of leaving. Graham closed the door behind him and moved deeper into the room. "Mind if I hide out here too? I've reached my quota of small talk for the evening." She gestured to the chair across from hers, and he settled into it, noting the way she'd tucked her feet under herself and wrapped her arms around her knees. The book in her lap was a collection of poetry. He realized worn and obviously well-loved. "Find something interesting?" he asked, nodding toward the book. "Oh, this is mine. I brought it with me." She held it up so he could see the cover, a slim volume with a midnight blue cover and silver lettering. "I wrote something for Rebecca once, years ago, a poem about friendship. I don't know what I thought, that maybe I'd find the right moment to give it to her." And now Mara's laugh was hollow. "Now I realize how stupid that was. She doesn't want my words. She never did." Graham studied her face in the lamplight, taking in the exhaustion and disappointment and something that looked like grief. "Can I ask you something? Why did you really come to this wedding?" "I told you," Marcus asked. "That's what you told yourself. But I don't think that's the whole truth." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I think you came because you needed to know if there was any chance of getting your friend back." The silence stretched between them, heavy with truths neither of them had planned to speak aloud. Finally, Mara nodded. "I kept thinking that maybe if she saw me again, remembered who we used to be together, maybe if I could just prove that I wasn't the person she thought I was." She shook her head. "But you can't argue with someone's narrative about you, especially when that narrative serves them better than the truth." "What do you mean?" Mara was quiet for so long that Graham thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's easier to believe I betrayed her than to admit she failed someone who needed her. It's easier to cast me as the villain than to examine whether she was the kind of friend who was there for the good times but disappeared when things got messy." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And maybe she's right. Maybe I should have told her what was happening with James instead of just handling it myself. You were protecting him. I was protecting everyone. James from having to explain himself when he was barely functional. Rebecca from having to deal with something that didn't fit her vision of their perfect relationship. Myself from having to admit that my best friend might not be the person I thought she was." Mara's voice broke on the last words. "But you can't protect people from the truth forever. It always finds a way out." Graham thought about his own history, the years he'd spent building walls around the scared, broken kid who'd nearly jumped off a building, the carefully constructed image of success that had become so complete he sometimes forgot it was a construction at all. "Do you regret it? Coming here? Ask me tomorrow," she said, managing a watery smile. "When I'm on a plane back to my real life, and this all feels like a very expensive fever dream." "What's your real life like?" "Small, quiet. I work at an independent bookstore in Portland. I live in a studio apartment with too many plants and not enough natural light. I write poetry that no one reads and short stories that no one publishes." She shrugged. "It's not glamorous, but it's mine." There was something beautiful in the way she said it, a contentment that surprised him. In his world, everyone was always reaching for more money, more recognition, more success. The idea of choosing small, of finding satisfaction in quiet, was foreign and oddly appealing. Do you like it? The writing, I love it. Even when it's terrible, even when it feels impossible. Even when I spend weeks staring at a blank page, it's the only thing I've ever done that feels completely honest. The way she talked about writing reminded him of how he'd felt about coding in the early days. Before it became about valuations and exit strategies, there had been a purity to it then, a sense of creating something from nothing that felt almost magical. I'd love to read something of yours sometime, he said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. You're just being polite. I'm never just polite. Ask anyone, it's one of my less endearing qualities. That earned him a real smile, the first he'd seen from her all day. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the party continuing without them beyond the library walls. Graham found himself thinking about belonging, about the difference between being invited and being wanted, about the courage it took to keep showing up even when you weren't sure you were welcome. I should probably get back, Mara said eventually. People will notice if I'm gone too long. Will they? Graham asked. Or will they just notice that the atmosphere is a little more comfortable? Without the reminder of complicated history, it was a harsh thing to say, but not untrue. He'd watched the dynamics all day, seen how the other bridesmaids relaxed when Mara stepped away, how Rebecca's smile became more genuine when she wasn't performing forgiveness for an audience. You're not wrong, Mara said quietly, but I promised Marcus I'd be here for the whole thing, and I keep my promises, even when they're stupid. She stood to leave, smoothing down her dress and checking her reflection in the window. The tears were gone, her composure restored, but Graham could see the effort it took. Mara, he said as she reached for the door handle. Yeah, for what it's worth, I think Rebecca's the one who lost out, not you. She looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all day. It's also the truth. After she left, Graham remained in the library, thinking about truth and the stories people told themselves. Through the windows, he could see the reception continuing, couples dancing, guests laughing, Rebecca and Marcus cutting their elaborate cake while photographers captured every moment. It looked perfect from the outside, but Graham had learned that perfection was often just another word for untrue, and he found himself wondering what other stories were being performed out there, under the string lights, what other truths were being carefully edited out of the narrative. When he finally rejoined the party, he kept finding his eyes drawn to Mara, who had slipped seamlessly back into her role as the grateful, quiet bridesmaid. But now he could see what he'd missed before the performance of it all. The careful way she held herself just slightly apart from the group, present, but not belonging. And for the first time in years, Graham found himself wanting to rewrite someone's story instead of just playing his part in it. The reception was winding down when it happened. Graham was standing near the bar, nursing his third whiskey and watching couples sway to the band's rendition of At Last, when Rebecca took the microphone for one final toast. I just want to thank everyone for making this the most perfect day of my life, she began, her voice carrying easily across the courtyard. She was radiant in the way only brides could be, her dress still pristine despite hours of celebration, her makeup flawless under the string lights. Marriage is about choosing to build a life with someone who shares your values, your dreams, your vision of what love should look like. Rebecca continued, her eyes finding Marcus in the crowd. It's about surrounding yourself with people who understand that kind of commitment, who believe in the power of doing things the right way. Graham felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. He found Mara in the crowd, saw her, standing with the other bridesmaids, her expression carefully neutral. Marcus and I have been so blessed to have friends who've supported us through our entire relationship, Rebecca went on, her voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. People who understand the importance of loyalty, of putting your friends' happiness above your own desires. People who know that some mistakes can't be undone, but they can be forgiven. The words landed like stones thrown into still water, sending ripples of discomfort through the crowd. Several guests glanced toward the bridesmaids, and Graham saw Courtney's barely concealed smirk. Mara's face had gone very pale, but she remained motionless, dignified in a way that made Graham's chest tight with anger. So here's to perfect love, perfect timing, and perfect friends, Rebecca concluded, raising her champagne flute. the kind of people who lift you up instead of holding you back. The toast was met with polite applause, but Graham could feel the tension in the air, the way conversations started up too quickly afterward. People eager to move past the awkward moment. He watched Mara excuse herself from the bridal party table, her movements carefully controlled, and this time he didn't wait to follow. He caught up with her at the edge of the property, where the manicured gardens gave way to wild vineyard rows. She was walking fast, her heels clicking against the stone path, her shoulders rigid with suppressed emotion. "Mara," he called, and she turned, her face streaked with tears she hadn't bothered to hide. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Did you hear what she just did to me in front of 200 people?" "I heard it." Graham's own anger was a living thing in his chest, hot and sharp. It was cruel and unnecessary and completely uncalled for. "She invited me here to humiliate me," Mara said, the words tumbling out now that the dam had finally broken. She needed a witness to her perfect life, someone she could point to and say, "See how much better I am than this person. I was never her friend. I was her cautionary tale." Graham wanted to contradict her, to offer comfort or perspective, but he suspected she was right. He'd seen enough boardroom politics to recognize a calculated takedown when he saw one. "Come on," he said instead, taking her hand. "Let's get out of here. I can't just leave. Marcus will understand. And if he doesn't, he's not the friend I thought he was." They walked through the vineyard in silence, following a path that wound up into the hills overlooking the estate. The party continued below them, the music and laughter growing fainter with each step. When they reached a small grove of olive trees at the crest of the hill, Mara finally stopped, sinking onto a fallen log and putting her head in her hands. "I'm such an idiot," she said. "I actually thought, I don't know what I thought, that we could be friends again, that she might remember who we used to be." Graham sat beside her, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixing with the lavender-scented air. "You're not an idiot. You're hopeful. There's a difference, is there? Because right now they feel like the same thing." He thought about that, about the ways hope and stupidity could look identical from the outside. "You know what I think? I think it takes more courage to hope than it does to protect yourself. Anyone can build walls. Not everyone can keep believing in bridges." Mara looked at him, her eyes bright with tears and moonlight. "When did you become so wise about hope?" "About 5 minutes ago. Talking to someone who showed up to a wedding, where she knew she wasn't really wanted because someone she cared about asked her to. That kind of loyalty is rare." "Loyalty," she repeated, the word bitter in her mouth. That's what she talked about in her toast. Loyalty and knowing your place and not reaching for things that don't belong to you. "She's wrong," Graham said simply, "about all of it. You didn't betray her, you saved someone she was too self-absorbed to help. You didn't steal her boyfriend, you held him together when he was falling apart. And you're not the person she described up there. You're someone who puts other people's needs ahead of your own, even when it costs you everything. You don't know me well enough to say that, don't I?" He turned to face her fully, struck by how beautiful she looked in the moonlight, rumpled and real in a way that made his chest ache. "I've been watching you all weekend. I've seen how you stepped back every time someone else needed space, how you've absorbed every snide comment and cruel look without retaliating. I've seen your poetry book and heard you talk about work you love that doesn't pay enough to live on. I've seen you choose kindness over self-preservation at every single turn. Graham, I've met 100 women who dress for me," he said, the words coming from somewhere deep and honest that he'd forgotten existed. "But you're the only one who ever showed up without pretending." The silence between them stretched taut with possibility. Graham could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then Mara was reaching for him, her hand cool against his cheek, and he was leaning into her touch like a man who'd been holding his breath for years. When he kissed her, it was with the desperate hunger of someone who'd finally found something real in a world built on carefully constructed facades. She tasted like champagne and tears and possibilities he'd stopped believing in. Her fingers tangled in his hair, and he pulled her closer, wanting to memorize the feel of her, the way she fit against him like she'd been made for this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Graham rested his forehead against hers. "Come away with me," he said, the words surprising him with their intensity. "What? Don't go back down there. Don't give her any more power over your story. Come away with me, and let's write something new." Mara stared at him, her eyes wide with possibility and fear. "I don't even know you. Not really. You know the parts that matter. You know I'm not going anywhere, and you know I see you for who you really are." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away the last of her tears. "Everything else we can figure out as we go." For a moment, he thought she might say, "No." Then she smiled, the expression transforming her face into something luminous and free. "Okay." She whispered. Yes, they didn't go back to the reception. Instead, they walked through the vineyard until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, her dreams of publishing a collection of poetry, his secret wish to fund artists, instead of just tech startups, the way they'd both learned to make themselves smaller to fit into other people's expectations. As the sun rose over the Napa Valley, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Graham felt something shift inside him, like a door he'd kept locked for years finally opening. 3 months later, the literary world was buzzing about a new platform called Wilder Words, a publishing venture that connected emerging writers with readers who craved authentic voices over commercial appeal. The co-founder, listed simply as M. Lynn, remained mysteriously private, but her debut poetry collection, Late Rivals, had already garnered critical acclaim for its raw honesty about friendship, betrayal, and the courage it takes to start over. Graham stood in the back of the independent bookstore in Portland, where Mara was giving her first public reading, watching her transform before an audience that hung on every word. She was radiant in a way that had nothing to do with designer clothes or perfect lighting. She was simply, completely herself. "The last poem is called Rewriting the Guest List," she said, her voice steady and sure. "It's about learning that sometimes the best stories begin when you stop waiting for an invitation to your own life." As she read, Graham thought about weddings and endings, about the difference between being chosen and choosing yourself. He thought about Rebecca, who had achieved her perfect wedding but lost something essential in the process, and Marcus, who had quietly divorced 6 months after the ceremony when he realized he'd married an idea rather than a person. But mostly, he thought about Mara, brilliant, brave Mara, who had shown up late to a party that was never really meant for her and had somehow changed everything simply by being herself. She had taught him that the most profound transformation wasn't about reinventing yourself, but about finally having the courage to be who you'd always been underneath the performance. When the reading ended and the applause died down, Mara found his eyes across the crowded bookstore. Her smile was private, meant just for him, and in it he saw their future, messy and real and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. Later that night, as they walked through the quiet Portland streets toward the apartment they now shared, Mara slipped her hand into his. "No regrets?" she asked, the question that had become their private joke. "Only one," Graham replied, squeezing her fingers gently. "That it took a wedding I didn't want to attend to find the person I'd been looking for my whole life." "Well," Mara said, stopping to kiss him under a streetlight that cast everything in golden warmth, "I guess sometimes you have to get lost before you can be found." And for the first time in either of their lives, they weren't the last to arrive. At their own story, they were exactly where they belonged, exactly when they needed to be there.